Hi family. Okay, so I'm out on another hike, definitely in my element. I was reflecting on the interview or the activation yesterday with Lauren Gailey, and I know we have a Q&A today, and I hope that you all join that because as I have been reflecting, she said something in the beginning about another speaker that said that everything has consciousness. And the depth of that is, for me, and not saying that I'm right, but I'm just gonna ask you to explore this with me for just a moment, is that everything has a frequency. And consciousness is the ability to exist or experience that frequency. And you could go as far, and I believe this is actually true, that that frequency can be read. And that frequency has, you could say, an intelligence, or maybe it is just that the frequency has information. With that, what part of that makes it conscious? And that is the person that is observing. So once, if you really look at the definition of consciousness, it is the awareness of, and of course you could say unconsciousness is not being aware. And then we have something that we call the superconscious or higher conscious, which is a state of consciousness that we can tap into and experience consciousness in a more pure way. But it's still consciousness. And why is that true? Because there is an observer of the reader of that consciousness. Once there is an observation, then yes, something becomes conscious. So unconsciousness is something that has been programmed. So that is like something that is running without our awareness. And that's why we say, oh, I became conscious of this, or oh, I awoke. But does that mean that that unconscious program was not conscious? Well, if something is programmed, then it has a frequency and it is running. And if it's running without our awareness, it's still running because it was programmed by an experience that happened before it. So example is that even if we were unconscious that we were storing a wound or a hurt or an emotion, and it's stored and creates an unconscious behavior or program, there was still a moment of consciousness in the experience that created that program. Okay, so to bear with me. So back to the question that I'm asking myself, and I'm going to invite you to ask yourself, is that, does everything have consciousness? I believe that that statement and consciousness is the very thing that keeps us looping in the third dimension. That does not mean that we do not want to be conscious. That is absolutely not what I'm saying. Consciousness is a tool of ascension. It is the ability to become aware of our surroundings and release identity of our surroundings by meeting the intelligence of our surroundings and creating a conscious choice of, is this in alignment with the frequency of source or is it not? And then we release and we continue. Consciousness is the ability to be aware of self and how we interact within that awareness. So are we interacting within that awareness in an unconscious way? Are we acting in the conscious awareness of our wounds or the programs that we are continuing to repeat? Or are we connecting into a consciousness that we call our higher consciousness, that is connected into a frequency of an intelligence that is outside of our programming? And that's what I call the fourth level of consciousness, but it's still a level of consciousness. It's still conscious, meaning that there's the part that is receiving the information, that is becoming aware of the information that's there. So when we become aware, or we are reading a frequency, we are still in an observed state. We are observing what that frequency is. We are observing what the intelligence of that frequency is. You could say that the divine frequency is within all things, but is the divine conscious of itself? Well, it doesn't need to be, because the divine is all things. It doesn't need to be conscious of itself because it is of all things. Now take that concept. unity consciousness. Is unity consciousness truly a state of consciousness? It's a pathway, right? To become conscious that all things are connected and to be able to be in that state of consciousness is the self-awareness that we are a part of all things, but it's still a self-awareness. It may even be the awareness that a tree has consciousness if consciousness is on an observed state of the tree, meaning a tree can have frequency, it can have something to say, but is it actually saying it, or is it the observer that is reading the energy of the tree and receiving the intelligence of the divine, interpreting it, and it is the observation of the reflection of self of the tree? Is it then that the tree is conscious, or is it the observer that is conscious? Now stay with me, because the observer is what is creating our 3D reality. It is the observer that creates all reality. It is the observer that creates particles that solidify and become a reality, even if it's a reality of just a thought. A thought is just much a reality as the ground that I'm sitting on. So, the question is, does everything have consciousness, or is it that everything has an intelligence or is in the frequency of source, and it is the observer of that frequency that is creating a reality? So what is the point here? The 12-strand DNA system is the intelligence of source. When it is releasing a frequency, it is releasing a frequency and it is moving through particles of reality. It's our observation on an observed state that is creating our reality. So it is the observation. And once it is an observation, there's always going to be a level of distortion. And this is where consciousness is not an identity. It is not in all things. It is the part that is separate from source that becomes conscious of the intelligence of source and then creates a reality around that. It's always going to have a level of distortion. But when we become the intelligence, that distortion goes away. So consciousness is the awareness of the intelligence. To be the intelligence, there is no consciousness because there's no need. And that is what I call the 5th level of consciousness. It is within that state of consciousness that you just become divine. You don't have the observation of self. The I am the divine, the I am falls away, and you just become. The sense of self isn't in an observed state. It is just an experience of self, not through consciousness, not through observation, but as source itself. So is there truly a sense of self? I'm going to say probably not, because there's no need to have a sense of self, because you become all that is. So sit in that. Let me know what your thoughts are. And I hope you can join today with Lauren and I, because I hope to explore this a little bit deeper and go into why it's so important to activate the 12-strand DNA system and to learn to use the technologies, because it's in the use of these technologies that we learn to use consciousness in a new way, that we start to release that consciousness is self-awareness. It is the awareness of an intelligence, and we truly become the intelligence.